everybody, and welcome to the final Flip Roundtable digital meeting for 2017. I am here with our guest CPO / General Manager Supply Chain MMG, Ron Brown. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Sally.
And our Content and Research Consultant, Hugo Britt from the faculty.
Thanks, Sally.
So today we will start with Ron, who'll be talking about lifting the standards in complex supply chains, and then Hugo will also provide some insights from the recent Gen Next survey. To ensure you get the most out of today, we want to make sure that you ask as many questions as you'd like, and we will be pausing after every few slides to allow for some questions. Please note, we've disabled your microphones and cameras, so to type a question, please type it in the question box, which is to the right-hand side of the screen. There will also be downloadable material in the handout section. So there's going to be Ron's slides and also the full Gen Next survey report, which you can access and download. We will also have a couple of polls to get your opinion on issues relevant to the presentation. So let's launch the first one right now. You should see it on your screen. Over to you, Hugo, to announce what the poll will be.
All right, so we've got a poll here that relates to Ron Brown's presentation, which will be dealing a lot with safety and procurement and safety. So our question here is, what does a focus on safety mean to you? So it's either adhering to day-to-day safety practices, ensuring policies and procedures are effective and up-to-date, or safety may mean to you, it may mean small incremental improvements in safety every day, or it could mean something along the lines of seeking out game-changing safety technology. So if you think of this in terms of innovation, it can either mean small incremental improvements or a big game-changing leap.
So in the meantime, while people are actually voting on the poll, I'm going to introduce Ron. So Ron is currently the General Manager Supply Chain for MMG. He's had extensive experience for over 25 years within the supply chain arena in both FMCG and the resources sector. He works within the Foster's Group in a number of roles, which also included national responsibilities of running logistics, production and procurement activities in beer and wine operations. He's also had roles running wholesaling liquor business, as well as involvement in M&A activities and related business integration. During this time, he also held a directorship and was chairman of the Biorecycled Business Alliance in Australia, which involved a number of major corporations in the promotion of use of recycled material for alternative markets. Over the past 12 years, he has been in the resource industry with responsibility of supply chains at both Newcrest Mining and MMG. Within these roles, he's responsible for global procurement, logistics and warehouse operations in operations across Africa, South America, Asia and Australian regions, with annual expenditure of between $2 to $3 billion over 600 plus contracts. And he's also been involved in education bodies during his career, including on curriculum advisory boards for RMIT and Swinburne for supply chain courses, as well as a number of roundtables. So I'd like to thank Ron for being here and providing some of his his time. And I would also like to encourage questions to be asked throughout, because obviously Ron has got lots of experience over many years, so please feel free to type some of those questions in that question box. I'll go back to you, Hugo, to talk about what the quick poll has provided for us.
Yeah, thank you, almost everybody for voting. So it looks like 86% of you have said that a focus on safety means small incremental improvements in safety every day. The next most popular being ensuring policies and procedures are effective and up to date, and equal tie for adhering to day-to-day safety practices and for seeking out game-changing safety technology. So I believe, Ron, that that last point is what you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely, Hugo, and it's great to see the responses on the safety areas, and I'm going to give a live example of something we're doing at MMG in that game changer as well. So, thanks everyone. It's great to be talking to the flips, as you know, around the country, and it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. I think a lot of you are in roles that talk a lot about adding value to the business, whether through your category management, sourcing activities, and the like. But I thought it's really important to look at it in a different light for this presentation. We're in supply chain and procurement in a privileged position to make a difference not only to business outcomes from a commercial viewpoint, but also about making a difference to our stakeholders and communities and the regions we operate in. And so this presentation is going to give you two examples in regard to lifting the standards in a logistics environment, and secondly, the enhancement or building relationships with local supply arrangements. And these are two examples that we're currently operating or using in MMG as well. There's a few slides in this pack, and also I'll be showing a video in terms of giving you a bit of an idea of what is the complexity of the logistics operations within MMG in Peru. For context though, to start off with, just to allow you a bit about MMG for those who don't know. There might be a couple of my members on the webinar, but MMG operate in four continents: in Africa, Peru, in Laos, in Asia, and in Australia. We're a copper and zinc mine company, and of various different sizes in regard to it, but one of our mine sites in Peru is in the top 5 copper producers in the world, and previously we closed down a site in Australia that was the biggest zinc producer. So we're a medium-sized resource company, but operating across the global scale in 4 major continents. The next slide gives you a bit more context from just a supply chain procurement viewpoint. Our annual spend is about $2.4 billion. We have about 4,200 active vendors. Typical profile of expenditure, 80% of our expenditures with our 4 top vendors, top 4% of our vendors, and that equates to 160 suppliers. We have about 900 contracts across the group. We hold about $180 million of inventory and have about 220,000 catalogued items, buying bits and pieces across the globe. Gives you a bit of context of MMG and what we do. But importantly, I want to talk more about our logistics routes in 3 of the regions we operate. The first one I want to talk about is Las Bambas. Las Bambas is a mine site that's at 4,000 to 4,500 meters above sea level in the middle of the Andes, not far from the Argentinian border. It's in a very remote area, and our supply chains are very unique and very difficult. You'll see a video shortly that gives you a bit of insight to it. Our supply chains for moving materials in and concentrate copper out vary between 700 kilometres of different roads through to 2,000 kilometres of different roads. This goes through up to 45 different communities in very rough and mountainous terrain, under different weather conditions throughout the year. As we speak today, in that whole supply chain, inbound, outbound with round trips, we'll have something like 1,500 trucks on the road moving in and out of that supply chain. And you could just imagine the variability that has and the complexity that has and the risk that it brings to our supply chains as well, and I'll show the video shortly.
So, Ron, I'm going to just ask a question. Does MMG invest in the quality of those roads, given that you've got so many trucks, heavy trucks moving across them all the time? Do you actually put some money into those, or is that up to the Peruvian authorities?
It's a good question, Hugo. Look, in many cases with mining companies, they will do some investment up front and provide funding for it. The roads themselves outside the mine site are obviously under the jurisdiction of the government authorities. So it can be financial assistance, and could be providing the project management aspects of it, but predominantly most of the jurisdictions, the responsibility lies with the local authorities.
And what happens when there's a real problem with the road, like it's say the road's eroded or crumbling to a point where you're worried about bringing the trucks over?
Yes. Yeah, so what we do is obviously alert the authorities on that, and if there's a significant issue that blocks the road, we'd be looking for their immediate attention to it. And in some cases, we provide some expert support in terms of solutions to those problems as well. The next slide is an overview of Laos. We operate a small mine site. There's only 2 mining companies operating in Laos, and we operate at a mine site called Sepon. Laos is an interesting country in that it's landlocked by 5 other countries around it, and the supply chain predominantly comes through Thailand for us. And similar to, as I spoke about before, our inbound and outbound trucks, we average 30 to 40 to inbound and 20 outbounds predominantly every day, operating in and out of Thailand on a 3-day cycle of 1,300 kilometres. The next slide gives you a bit of an overview of that and in terms of it. So again, you know, complex supply chain, road conditions quite vary across each of the regions we operate under in remote areas as well. And the third operation on the next slide is in Africa. We operate in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a country that again has got to go through multiple countries, predominantly sourcing product out of South Africa into the Democratic Republic of Congo. And again, as you could imagine, very unique supply chains going through cross borders into the country. And again, our amount of movements, about a 7-day round trip out of South Africa with trucks inbound and outbound of approximately 40 or 50 a day operating.
Can I just go back to the previous slide? I know there's a lot of Chinese investment with the, what's it called, the Belt and Road Grand Vision they have there in China. So are you seeing evidence of that there where you operate?
Absolutely. So one of the initiatives with China at the moment is developing a rail network from China through the middle of Laos as we speak. So that's part of that broad-ranging Chinese government initiative, which I think spans over 15 countries in different shapes and forms, by the way. So it's a massive investment in terms of trying to improve the supply chain solutions in a global network, and a significant investment.
Okay. All right, I'd just like to apologise for the noise you can hear coming through. We've got a power drill operating outside the window here, unfortunately, but we'll push on and hopefully you can hear us loud and clear.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is go to a video. This video goes for approximately about 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, I know that some people might have had some problems with the video, so hopefully some were able to get at least a feel for the complexity of our supply chains. And as I said, as we speak, there's a number of trucks working through our different supply chains in very remote areas. Late last year, about in July of last year, unfortunately we lost one of our drivers. He had a fatigue episode in his truck, rolled off the side of a mountain and unfortunately lost his life. And we at MMG are passionate about our safety of all people, whether within the mine or outside of our supply chains. Safety is the #1 core value for our organisation. Philippe Chavez had two children, and it hit us very hard. So what did we look at? We looked at the reasons why this event occurred, and predominantly fatigue is a major issue, not only for businesses running businesses with trucks and the like around it, but also from a personal viewpoint for you in day-to-day life going on holidays. So we looked at a number of technologies that can help improve the controls in that. And the next slide gives you a bit of next couple of slides will give you a little bit of insight of what we looked at in trying to lift the standards in managing fatigue for drivers in our supply chains. So a couple of little dot points for you. First of all, when researchers indicated 48% of truck drivers have said they've fallen asleep while driving. That's an amazing statistic, and makes you wonder every time we're driving on the road and seeing the amount of trucks going past us, the possibility of that happening and what that could mean. And of course, when fatigue does happen, whether it's a micro fatigue event or a major one, it's well known that they believe this is just like the equivalent of being drunk driving. Your ability to actually respond if something happens is reduced, and therefore could lead to ultimately a serious injury or damage to people and the like as well. So we looked at a number of technologies around, and there's a number of technologies around in this area of detecting fatigue. But what we wanted and what we looked at is first is having something that allows us to detect when a driver is becoming drowsy, notifying the driver that that event is occurring. We wanted to notify our convoy pilots in the field, so we wanted real-time information happening about a driver, not only to the person themselves for being able to respond, but also to the extended network, which also includes notifying a control room, and also allows us to provide an understanding of what's happening with driver behaviour as well. Technology around is of various nature. In the next slide, we looked at two solutions. The first one is based on eye closure. So there is a lot of technology around with cameras that actually are watching and able to see your what's happening with your eyes. That gives you a detection about the potential of a fatigue event happening. Of course, though, that type of technology is more reactive, and it's post the fatigue, or it's happening, or detecting while the fatigue is happening, and therefore by nature means that any intervention is more after the event, before the event. So even though that technology has a lot to give us in terms of information, typically it can be after the event and therefore not put a critical control in place. The second technology around is a brainwave technology piece. It's just, that monitors the activity happening in your brain. I'm no technical medical person at all, but this technology enables to measure brain waves and then in fact alert the driver and related parties that a fatigue event is potentially imminent. And after a lot of assessment of the different technologies around, we landed on one being a technology called SmartCap. And SmartCap is a solution. It's just like wearing a headband around your head. You can wear it with a cap or a helmet, so to speak, and enables to measure the brain waves. And I'll go through the next slide about what it actually can do from an alert viewpoint as well.
We've just had a question come through. So are these third-party solutions, or have they been built specifically for MMG? And is the management and operationalization of these technologies in-house or outsourced?
Very good question. No, it's an outside third-party solution. We're partnering with the company SmartCap in relationship to this. They've actually installed it into different mines over the last 12 to 18 months, but nowhere near the scale to what we're doing here on the transportation piece. Once we've got the technology and enables us to use the information effectively, but it does rely on a third party, and that relationship occurring not only in installation and implementation, but ongoing maintenance of the items, the hardware, and also the use of the software as we go forward. So this technology, what does it do? It measures brainwaves in EGN to determine alertness. It actually links, if we were doing this live, I'd be able to put the headband on, I can link it to my iPhone, it can tell me whether I'm falling asleep after lunch here or not, and give me an alert in regard to it. So it's real-time information using standard technology hardware pieces in regard to it. And you can, and the hardware options are you can bring it, buy it yourself, or connect it to your own device. The next slide actually then provides what it does, and there's actually telling you at different levels of fatigue what happens. Now, coming back to the main point I wanted to raise here, we want this to be a preemptive tool to give us information and to the particular drivers in question that in fact they're moving into a fatigue event. I'm sure all of us have gone through this in your life when you're starting to feel tired and whatever, but this actually tells you this by using the technology through the brainwaves. And we have 4 different alerts, and what that does is give an insight to the driver initially that that there are some typical level, there are some fatigue events occurring, and there's some indicators to it, to move into a level 4 that there's a very heightened risk of a micro slip.
And Ron, just a quick question, does that come through their iPhone or whatever they've plugged it into?
Yeah, so we've got it on a dashboard in the trucks. It actually gives a alert, both in sound and in terms of light, and saying you've now moved into this area. It also now, depending on the communications within the supply chain, will go back into a convoy system where we normally have a pilot driver taking a convoy through to alert that supervisor. And eventually, and it's starting now, is it will go back to a head control room. And as the communication technology improves, particularly in the remote regions we operate in, it will go back to a control room. And by doing this, we can then ring the driver, even though through remote drivers to indicate where they're at. The most important thing, like anything with safety, is safety comes from within. And it's about the individual taking action themselves. That's the best way of preventing safety, as we all done. Driver behaviour is a really important piece on this. And we've had a lot of research indicating that drivers feel compelled to keep going because that's what they're paid to do. And we're trying to educate them that it's okay to stop if you're not feeling well enough to drive or tired. And in fact, we want to give them warning signs that it's happening and empowering them to do so as well.
So on that driver education piece, have you had any pushback from the drivers themselves about wearing the device? I mean, do any of them feel it's invasive at all? Are they worried about the technology?
A little, but not a lot. And that was one of the things that we talked about. How do you make something that is effective, that it's not looking like a bit of a dork wearing something in terms of a headband? And as you say, you can clip this inside a cap or a helmet in regard to it. So a couple of instances, but generally it's been well accepted. We've introduced that to 5 transport companies at the moment in Peru. And the move is we want to go to 15 companies as well. And in fact, what we're finding in Peru, where we're installing this at the moment, is the transport companies ultimately want to take it up for the remainder of their business, which really comes back to the point of this presentation. By this lifting the standards, it's not only lifting the standards within our own supply chains within MMG, but it actually will lift the standards to transportation generally, both within Peru and hopefully around the world as well. And by doing that, we're making a real difference of improving the safety as well.
And what about applications beyond transport and truck driving? Can you see these being used anywhere else?
We haven't thought that far ahead. At the moment, we're using it. We're trialling it with bus transport services, taking people into our mine sites. We're trialling it in our open pit mine with our drivers in the open pit mine who are working 12-hour days as a typical shift pattern, which is the case in mining. So we have other applications, but in handling with light in vehicle, effectively in vehicle driving at this point in time. But I'm sure there may be some other ways of utilising the technology as well. So that's really what I wanted. That's the first part of the presentation. It was an example of what we're doing, and the reason I'm saying that from a procurement viewpoint is the procurement team were heavily involved in looking with our technology, IT technology, and our operations about what solutions are out there, working with a supplier in terms of the solution, explaining to the suppliers what our requirements are, so it's not a take it off the shelf, but these are the types of things we want to see, bringing better controls in place and therefore lifting the whole standards in terms of it.
Was it a long process?
Well, the process is still underway. It has been a long process. It's now 12 months since we started the process. We're effectively implementing it as we speak across 1,400 truck drivers in Peru as well. And the reality of this is not only about real-time detection, but also it'll give us insights in particular about when these events are occurring as well. So it will challenge how we design our supply chains with the amount of hours driving at certain stops, whether it's happening at certain times, is it in certain locations. So it will bring powerful information to enable us to improve our standards and the way we operate as well. And the beauty of these technologies, like anything, it's only as good as how you use the information effectively as well.
Excellent. Well, before you move on to your next part, I'd just like to encourage the listeners to type in your questions into the questions section, and we'll feed them through to Ron.
So the next part of the presentation is about developing local supply. And for those who are not in the resource sector, but I'm sure in your industries you have these opportunities and looking at ways of developing small, medium-sized enterprises is driving a supply model. A lot of mining companies have obligations to operate in the jurisdictions we do, and in fact have local supply obligations to drive new businesses. So again, this example is around Las Bambas in Peru. This project's been going on for 10 years. We only became an operation effectively 18 months to 2 years ago. It was a $10 billion project, and one of the first things we started to do in the middle of the mountains, where you have to remember that this is communities that are very much remote from any normal business operations. So we've got a local supply entrepreneur team, part of the supply team, who have been developing local businesses as well. And I'm really pleased to say that we've gone through a really disciplined process. Some companies tried to jump to the end solution very quickly and say, oh yeah, I can find I've got an opportunity for you here, we'll give it to you as a local community member, and off you go. But what we've tried to do is build businesses in a sustainable way. And the program over the last 3 years that we've developed is developing, in conjunction with government, local businesses, how to operate a business. And it's gone through 3 levels of qualifications to allow us to say, yes, you're now ready to be able to operate the business and operate it effectively and provide a service or goods into our mine site. It's taken 18 months to 2 years, but again, to cut to the end point at the moment, we now have been able to accredited 51 local companies in the middle of the Andes in very remote jurisdictions, all of different levels. And how did we do that? First of all, the next slide will provide a bit of a process. Is we identified areas that we think there are opportunities, and we operate in our mine operations, and they all through logistics companies, labour services, farm products to help us feed our people at our mine site, and also in the general maintenance and construction area. And that identification helped us find a number of companies, as I said, to go through that accreditation processes as well. We ran the programs, and it started off by the basics of opening up a bank account to be able to actually transact, to start off at the very basics, to driving or putting together a business plan, understanding what that supply, that company could do, and ultimately get to the stage of providing the services. Importantly, we provided them the support and services to that and allowed them the opportunity to operate and then learn from that environment. For me, local supply arrangements, a lot of people focus also on the revenue generated out of the company, out of providing services to us. But if you look at sustainability beyond that, and particularly for a mine company that has a life of mine that typically is 20 years to 40 years, ultimately success and sustainability for local supply is for them to be able to operate once that mine closes. To me, that's the reality of sustainable supply solutions and sustainable local supplies, that they're not reliant on our mine sites for the income to generate and run a profitable business, but beyond that, be able to operate their business. So the next slide actually gives an overview of what we've been able to achieve. So in the last, this is up until the end of May this year, over the last 12 months, we've had something like $41 million of transactions that have occurred with these companies. It's a tremendous result. If you think of it in Las Bambas, we spend about $1 billion a year as well. So that is equating to about 4% of our expenditure has been able to be spent with these local suppliers over a 12-month period. And that is a tremendous result and great work done by the team. I might stop there, and there may be some questions that someone might want to ask.
Yeah, we'll give people the chance to send through some questions, and again, sorry for that noise in the background. I was just thinking, Ron, you're probably used to speaking against the background of drilling noises, so you're probably okay on that.
Some special sound effects.
Yeah.
That's right, give you the mining feel.
That's
exactly.
right. Yeah.
in relation to the team that actually set all that up, are they within Australia or are they actually local?
No, they're local Peruvians, and we have 3 people who first of all identify where the potential needs could be. So it's a real push, say, a pull. We have a lot of local suppliers come in and say, I want to provide you a service, but they don't know what they're going to provide. So we provided the pool for the services to start off with by identifying the areas, and then work with them in conjunction with local authorities in developing that business acumen. And as I said, the success of it over the last 2 years has been tremendous, and we're running at about $40 million annualised revenue for these businesses. Importantly, the next slide actually indicates that we're now, some of those companies are now generating revenue outside the mine site already. So roughly about 15 to 20% of revenue is now being generated out of the mine site. Comes back to my sustainability comment about developing a business that can operate beyond just the direct involvement of us, who clearly can make some decisions more easily rather than a robust process. And one live example I'd love to give is earlier this year I was lucky enough to go to one of the local communities and talk to the owners of one company who just recently won a $4 to $5 million tender for a piece of work in welding in Peru, some 600 kilometres away from where they operate. So it's a tremendous example of mother and father of the company who were just local farmers in the local regions, had no business background at all some 3 years ago, and their son went out and did an engineering degree and now is running that business. And it's just a tremendous feeling to see someone from what environment they've come from with the standards of education that they've come from to where they've got to at the moment. And again, it just leads you to what can the influence of a procurement function can have beyond just normal business sense as well. And I think us as a function have the great opportunity and actually a privilege to be able to make a difference in different areas beyond just that normal business area.
We just had a question come through. So this is from Manu Karanu, who's listening in. Does MMG coordinate with local government to drive local procurement, or is it direct? Is there a target percentage for local procurement?
Yeah, it's a direct model for this one. We find that having a direct model is one that we can influence better than coming from a government agency. There's always pressures on the local government areas, as it is in Australia, for example, to buy Australian products and whatever. But we find that, again, us taking over the ownership of this and driving it. In terms of the percentage, there's no direct percentage target, but what we do monitor in our sustainability report, and that's available for anyone to see, is what percentage of our expenditure occurs within country jurisdictions with companies versus particular regions and local regions as well. And my view on this is, as long as we're showing that there's growth in that area, that's the most important thing as we build that business model as well. But ultimately, again, the suppliers have to stand on their own 2 feet as well. So it's one thing to be able to put targets, but we can't let the targets drive an unsustainable solution. So the supplier must take ownership, like any small and medium enterprise, be able to provide the quality services that their customers want, and this is no exception to that.
So you mentioned a model for engaging with local suppliers and encouraging local companies. Have you tailored that in any way to where you are in the world? So you've got Peru and the Congo and Laos and then even Queensland. So are you finding that it's the same approach wherever you are, or do you have to change it as you move around?
I think ideally, I think the approach we're doing in Peru is world class and the best in practice. I think we've learned from our experiences in other countries where we've tried to do it in a slightly different way and it hasn't been successful, and it's been more what I call piecemeal ad hoc. So this model is the best one. The ability to be able to do that in other countries is the challenge we've got at the moment as well. But yeah, it's something that I think creating the environment and creating the standards is the most important thing, and I think we've got to take accountability for that. well. So that were the two live examples of, you know, making a bit of a difference, lifting the standards. One, lifting the standards in terms of the safety systems that we've got in logistics and supply chains, and we're going to bring that across our whole globe over the next 2 years. And the second one's about lifting the standards of local suppliers so they're able to supply not only to us but to other companies that gives a sustainable model.
So while we have Ron with us at the moment, I just wanted to double check if we have any questions that we would like Ron to answer. In the meantime, do we have another poll that we wanted to launch, Hugo?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go straight on to our next poll, and like I said, Ron's going to be here in case any more questions come through in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, let's see. Okay, so this relates to the next presentation, where it's about career management in procurement. So the question is, basically, how did you find your current role? So did you find it through an online jobs board, through an internal job opportunity, through social media, through your personal network, or were you headhunted by a recruiter? All right, so we'll just give a minute or so for that to come through. So in the meantime, Ron, you mentioned that your community engagement model for Peru was world-class, and you want to apply that to your other sites around the world. Do you have anything else in Peru that you feel that you would apply to, say, the Queensland operation as far as you know, best practice way of doing things?
Yeah, or vice versa. I mean, we share, you know, on the other side, we're doing a lot of good work in warehouse operations, for example, and we share that knowledge about setting up. So when we set up the warehouse at Las Bombas, we actually used our good practices that we had in our other operations, particularly in Australia, in setting up that site. So again, the beauty of a global function is bringing excellence and global knowledge into a local execution and delivery point. And I think for those on the call who are in those global environments, I think that's where the real value is, because sharing knowledge and sharing good practice can come from many different ways and different jurisdictions and different parts of the business. But the way that you bring that all together in a centre-led function allows you to make improvements.
Absolutely, and that's probably one of the beauties of centre-led right there, isn't it? Just being able to be that connection between all those different pieces and pulling out what works and applying it elsewhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for voting. We've got some results coming in, and it looks like by far that people have found their current role through an internal job opportunity. So that's obviously referring to roles or promotions within their organisation. The second most popular is being headhunted by a recruiter, then an online jobs board, and fourth place through my personal network. I've got a bit to talk about on the networking side, and finally no one has selected social media as a way that they've found their current role. So let me go back to the main presentation. Okay, so this presentation is called 10 Surprises from the Procurement Gen Next report, or Generation Next, How to Take Control. So this is something we launched in Procurious in September this year. You might have actually participated in the survey, and if you did, I'd like to thank you very much for that. We had over 500 responses from people all over the world. And the idea of the survey was to get some data around something that the team at Procurious is very passionate about, which is career management and optimizing your career and the career journey in the procurement and supply management profession. So There are a lot of reports out there, a lot of research out there on the technical procurement side, but there's not much on that sort of career journey side. So for followers of Procurious, you'll see we write about this angle on the blog a lot as well. So just a quick rundown of what Procurious is. I'm hoping you're all on board and involved in Procurious, but essentially it's the online business network for procurement and supply chain professionals. So people ask me, well, what does that mean? It's essentially LinkedIn for procurement. So if you're on LinkedIn, you'll know that you build up a network of professional connections. But one of the issues is that they come from all over the place. You might get a lot of noise that's irrelevant to you on that platform. So the beauty of Procurious is that those 25,000 members are all procurement and supply management professionals. So everything you see on there is a potential learning, interesting and relevant to you. The site itself has a few different features. It's got an e-learning portal with some training videos there. It's got the blog itself, which has some sort of article come out every day. There's a news section to keep you up to date with what's happening in the profession. And one of the most exciting parts is the discussions board, where you can ask a question and there might be a business challenge that you're facing in your role, and someone from the other side of the world might say, well, that happened to me last year, this is my solution, what do you think? So it's a way to get your problem solved or to bounce your problems off others. Okay, so as I said, we have 25,000 members. We had, I think it was 512 people took the survey across 140 countries. So the biggest finding was that evidence of a divide has emerged between procurement professionals who are proactively seizing control of their career management and others who are waiting for a promotion or a big break that may never come. So we've labeled this group Procurement's Generation Next. This isn't a generation defined by year of birth. It's defined by a positive attitude that can be found across every age group, from baby boomers to Gen Z. So our survey identified the levers that Generation Next are using to manage and supercharge their careers, from developing vital mentoring relationships to building social media profiles that have eclipsed the importance of CVs, to seamlessly leveraging the professional networks to find a new role. The members of Gen Next are collaborative, they're proactive, and they're ambitious. So today I'm going to run through 10 of what I find to be the most interesting findings in the report, but I'd encourage you to go to the handouts tab and download the whole report for yourself. It's also available on Procurious itself if you have any trouble downloading it here from the system. Broadly, it lists many of the common career hurdles and springboards across the 500 survey participants. It shows you how to tap into the power of your professional network, how to reap the benefits of being truly connected with peers inside and outside your organization, and how to solve any challenge through the power of crowdsourced solutions. So let's have a look at these 10 surprises from the report. The reason we've called it 10 surprises from the Gen Next report is because back in September I was invited to speak at a procurement conference, which is actually this week, and the report hadn't even come out at that stage, so I said, that's fine, I'll call this 10 surprises from the Gen Next report. And now I've found myself having to dig back into the report to find 10 surprising facts. So you might agree or disagree that some of these findings are surprising. Some of them actually, rather than being a surprising finding, they confirm or put some actual data behind some assumptions that we've been making on Procurious, such as a fact as basic as an online network is important to your career. So we say that all the time, and now we've actually got some data to support that. So let's have a look at number one. So we asked people how they would describe their plan for career advancement. We had less than 1/3 of surveyed professionals having clear long-term plans for their career advancement. So from a personal standpoint, I'm always quite impressed by people who plan this far ahead. When someone sits down and says, well, this is where I am now, I plan to be at X in 2 years, at Y in 5 years, and I'll achieve this goal within 10 years. That's always amazing to me. Personally, I have trouble planning ahead as far as the weekend. So when we broke this down by age groups, we found that there's something of a mid-career crisis. So results showed that clarity around career advancement decreases steadily as workers age up to a certain point. So 40% of the 18 to 24-year-old cohort reported clear long and short-term career advancement plans. Perhaps that's the arrogance of youth coming through there, we'll see. Apologies to any 24-year-olds listening in. Yet this figure drops to 29% between the ages of 35 and 55. And then, interestingly, clarity increases after the age of 55, and I presume that this is as people plan their exit from the workforce. After the age of 55, you might have, who knows, there might be 1 or 2 key roles left in your career plan before you retire. All right, so the second surprise, and this one was a bit of a surprise when we got these results through, is we asked people, do you trust your boss to be proactive about your career progressions? So we used slightly playful language throughout this survey to keep people engaged. I know people don't use the term boss anymore. It tends to be manager or team leader, for example. But the results here show that over half of procurement professionals don't trust their boss to be proactive about their career progression. So to me, this indicates that professionals need to seize control of their own career advancement, while on the other side, managers need to be incentivized to support and progress their direct reports. So my reading of this is that waiting for your boss to reward and recognize your work is now seen as somewhat old-fashioned. So waiting and hoping for a big career break is no longer a viable strategy. Instead, it's time to get proactive. So let's have a look at some of the comments that participants made about this question. It's up to me to seek opportunities. Again, that's that. This is my responsibility, not the responsibility of my manager. My boss is less qualified and leans on me for knowledge. It's a bit interesting one. My boss is only self-focused. My boss is too busy. My boss doesn't understand the value I bring. Now that one is something I've heard actually apply to the procurement profession in general, when people say, look, the business doesn't understand the value that procurement as a whole can bring. Some other ones we had come through were, my boss doesn't want me to leave. A promotion would mean taking their role, and that's similar to this final one, which is there's no room or scope for advancement. So on that note, the third surprise is we asked the question about what people believe is the biggest hurdle to their career progression. So flat organizational structure came through as the #1 concern there. That's definitely a trend we've been seeing, talking to our recruitment colleagues in the Source recruitment consultancy here. There certainly seems to be that issue where there's people say, look, there's nowhere to go. We've even had one of the Roundtable members mention that they brought in a layer of middle management, which goes very much against the trend, just to create that feeling of, yeah, there is somewhere to move to, somewhere to look to. But that's not what I want to focus on for this one, actually. It's the next 2 higher scoring hurdles there are a lack of access to key individuals who can assist your career progression through seniority or experience. So career advancement is hindered by a lack of access to a champion, or I think another term that's used often there is a sponsor who can represent your interests at their level, and secondly, a lack of access to a mentor. So I've got that blue arrow there pointing through to the second chart. So having a lack of access to mentors is concerning, given that mentors are seen as the #1 most trusted source for career advice. Well ahead of the next most trusted source, which is your peers. The other thing that's a bit surprising here is that people feeling they have a lack of access to mentors, firstly, it's something that you can do by yourself. You don't have to wait for your boss or someone in HR to set that up for you. And the second point is that with training budgets shrinking so dramatically, it's a very cost-effective or pretty much free way of upskilling people is connecting them with some sort of mentor. So for future leaders, you probably know that as part of the program, Roundtable membership, you do have access to the faculty's mentoring program, where we connect people with CPOs from the Roundtable, and that might be across state lines as well.
And it's not just CPOs, it's also other levels as well. And I guess sometimes in the past, people have always thought it has to be someone, you know, three levels up or something, but in more and more these days, mentors can come in all different levels and ages and everything else.
That's right. There's the whole idea of the reverse mentoring, which is where, say, a CPO who's a bit uncomfortable using technology looks to someone who's a digital native to show them how things work and glean some insights there, so they fill that gap in their knowledge without actually going along to some sort of formal training course. All right, so just a reminder, you're very welcome to send through some questions about these. You know, you can challenge the results or disagree with my reading of them if you'd like to. So I'm keeping an eye on the question box here. Okay, so the fourth one, we've called this one network, network, network. So we asked people what they think will contribute most to their career advancement in procurement. So the surprise here was that professional networks are viewed as equally important for career advancement as on-the-job performance. So this means you could be the world's best category manager or the most amazing procurement analytics guru in Australia, but if you haven't nurtured your professional network, you're going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to career advancement. So I think that confirms that old adage, which is it's not what you know, but who you know. So that's something to keep in mind, certainly if you're working extremely hard and focused on performance, you've got to make time to nurture that network. So the chart on the right shows a similar finding that professional networks are identified as the most crucial element in finding a new role, even more so than being in contact with professional recruiters. So that to me brings up the idea of the hidden jobs market. So jobs or opportunities that never actually get the chance to be advertised because they're filled before it even hits the press, really. So that might be we had a guest speaker come along to the Brisbane Roundtable last week who talked about filling a key role in her team, and she talked about the first thing she did was log on to LinkedIn, and it would apply equally to Procurious, of course, and go through her contacts until she basically found someone who she realised would be absolutely perfect for the role. All right, so surprise number 5 is that online profiles are equally important as CVs. So we asked people what they felt was more important when job seeking, their online profile or their CVs. We had 25% say their CVs, 15% said their online profiles, and 67% said they're equally important. So For me, this confirms a widely held belief that online profiles are just as important as CVs. Very few employers or recruiters would neglect to perform a basic search for candidates online. So it also brings up the idea that perhaps CVs are on the way out. I mean, 5 years, 10 years, who knows, they might disappear, and your LinkedIn profile or your online presence can basically serve as your resume. As for what makes a good online profile, if you spend any time on professional social media, you get a feel for what good looks like. So some people have the bare minimum, just their name, their current job title, a handful of connections. Sometimes they don't even have a profile photo, or a really inappropriate photo is another one that we sometimes see. So the best online profiles have a highly professional photo. They have a full employment and education history. They've got a list of top skills, endorsements from others, that's important, and they're very well connected with others in the profession. So the secret ingredient to position yourself as a thought leader is also to generate content. So this means actively sharing third-party articles and posts that you believe will be valuable to people in your network. Posting your own original observations. You don't have to give away the secrets of your business. It can just be observations about something you've done that day that you believe could be valuable to others. And if you're a confident writer, you could even write and publish your own articles. LinkedIn, for example, has its publishing platform for everyone who has a profile, and you see some people do that very well. So surprise number 6, and this one was a little bit disappointing, I thought, where we asked people if they've ever crowdsourced a solution to a business problem on social media. So only 23% of procurement professionals said yes to this one. And this may include asking something as simple as asking for a business process or a template. You know, has anyone done this before? Can you share your template with me? Requesting information about alternative suppliers. Say if there's an issue with yours. Seeking career advice from peers who are not connected in any way with your organization. So that's an interesting one as well. So on the right, you'll see that the clear favorite reason for crowdsourcing solutions on social media is the access to a diversity of ideas. So nothing kills innovation so much as a lack of diversity. If you're concerned that the people in your team are suffering from a sameness of ideas, or the concept of groupthink, where you have a group of people together for long enough, they'll all fall into the same patterns of thinking, or the other danger is that if there's a dominant player in your team, everyone tends to follow that person. One way to break out of that box is to tap the knowledge of global peers with wildly different backgrounds, very different work histories and ways of approaching procurement challenges. So some of those other reasons, apart from the diversity of ideas, is that people say, well, it's easier than trying to solve the problem alone. I mean, think about the big issues like tackling modern slavery in your supply chain. It's just so big, you know, it's daunting, and the idea is it's too big for an individual. It's probably too big for your procurement function within your organization. You need to get connected, see what other people are doing, get some ideas, and then take it from there. You know, standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. Other people say it's fast, and this one is quite a good one. I don't want my work colleagues to know. I think when people are afraid of being seen asking silly questions, or what they think will be silly questions, they might put it out to social media instead. You know, perhaps something that they feel that their colleagues would assume that they'd already know. Okay, so this one is an interesting one for the team managers out there. We've called this slide "Throw Out Your Retention Plan," and you'll see why. So 34% of respondents intend to leave their current organisation within the next 2 to 5 years. So that's nearly 20% within the next 1 to 2 years, 18% within the next 12 months. So this means that a procurement team manager who's built their dream procurement team, they've hired, they've spent a lot of time developing this team, they've got it exactly as they want. Yet unfortunately, they can expect to see just under 40% of their team leave the organisation within the next 2 years, and 70% leave within the next 5 years. So the obvious question I always get asked here is this due to those brattish millennials job hopping all the time? So we filtered it out by age, and results indicate that participants are increasingly likely to stay at an organisation for longer than 2 years as they grow older. So I call that the mortgage factor there. So as people get older and perhaps they get settled down with a few more responsibilities, they tend to remain in their organisation a bit longer. The other thing is, when we presented this around the faculty roundtable members, we were challenged on these findings, saying, oh, we're not seeing this sort of churn in our team. And my answer to that would be that this is what people, it's an intention rather than reality. So you might say, oh, look, I'm not planning to be here for another 3 years. You know, I'd really want to be elsewhere by then. But when reality sets in and perhaps things change and your personal circumstances or things might improve, of course, at work, you're likely to stay on a bit longer. So what does this mean from the manager's point of view? If you're a manager, it's time to shift your thinking, throw away the retention plan, and accept the reality that today's workforce is increasingly mobile. So when I say mobile, that means a shift to the gig economy, where instead of me, for example, having Sally on a particular project, that project finishes and I have to find something new for Sally to do, you bring in the professional that you need for that project for that time, and then once it's done, once that's wrapped up, they move on and you bring in another professional for whatever you're focused on next. But does this mean giving up on developing your team? So people say, well, why am I spending all this money training these professionals, training, development, I'm investing time, I'm mentoring and coaching them if they're just going to move on? And the wisdom there is that if you're known as a supportive manager who gives others the opportunity to go on to a stellar career, you'll become a talent magnet in the profession. So surprise number 8 is we asked people what they felt about their managers' communication skills and communicating the need for change management. So the result there was decidedly average. That was 51%. So professionals perceive their managers as only moderately effective in communicating the need for change in procurement. So given that change management is an integral part of many senior roles in the profession, this perception really needs to be improved. So the chart on the right-hand side shows that only 1/4 of respondents feel that their managers use the full suite of communication tools when driving change. 75% say, oh no, they just send an email. So simply sending an email without an important change isn't going to cut it. So if you want a change to stick, you'll need to use every trick in the book. So that might be online collaboration tools such as Slack or Facebook for Business, I've heard is excellent. Newsletters, face-to-face catch-ups, social media if appropriate. One of our roundtable members shared a pretty good trick, which was getting his procurement messages up on the little video screens in the company elevators, which is a classic example of a captive audience. These people had nowhere to go, so they had to look at the screen, and that's when he got his message through. So to complicate things further, your message will need to be adjusted to suit your different audiences, always presenting the change with a what's in it for me approach. So then we asked about people's, we mentioned there are shrinking budgets for training and development in procurement. We know that because we've conducted benchmarking research for the past decade, and there's definitely a downward trend as far as training budgets go. So we asked if there was an event or training that you wanted to attend in person, are you confident that you will get the budget required to go? And less than half are confident that they could attain that budget. So where my mind goes when I read this is that for 50% of participants, e-learning would be the affordable alternative. But that chart on the right, we asked people if they had a choice, would they prefer to attend training in person at the training venue or online, you know, from the comfort of their home in their pajamas with a glass of wine in their hand? And they said, no, we want to be there in person at the training video. So that would suggest that face-to-face training is regarded as more effective. Perhaps it sticks a bit better than e-learning, and also there's the networking aspect as well. I mean, you want to meet your other training participants, and often with e-learning, that's a sort of invisible audience. You don't know who else is participating with you. So given that those budgets are shrinking, there will have to be a change in perception here if we're going to shift to e-learning. So there's some discontent there, but the good news is that the major training providers are shifting their content online, and there's now some really good procurement training content out there, and it's broken down into bite-sized pieces, which is called micro-learning. Apparently, you know, attention spans are down to the 50-second mark now, and that's about the length of some of these short training videos. All right, so talking about attention spans, we're coming to the end of this presentation, and surprise number 10 is what I mentioned at the very start about putting some data behind something that we believe very strongly in at Procurious, which is believing that being well connected online improves your on-the-job performance. So a clear majority, 71%, said yes to this. And the key factor here is having access to a diversity of ideas, as we've already discussed. So if you're only networking with and talking to the people in your team, those around you, perhaps every now and then at a training event, that's a very small bubble that you're living in, compared to being able to have an access to the entire global network of procurement peers who might have faced exactly the challenges that you're facing right now in a previous time. So the other side of that is asking whether people are actually able to access social networking sites from the office. So we're not talking about Facebook here, we're talking about LinkedIn, Procurious, those sort of sites. So 68% allow full access to social networking sites. There's a trust element there, which is a very important factor here. 23% block selected sites, such as Instagram or Facebook, and while an exception is often made for LinkedIn, and 9% of organizations have a total ban. And I've worked for one of those organizations in the past, and it was very frustrating for that reason. I used to use social networks or business networks as a research tool, basically, to you know, not to slack off at work, but to do my job better, and to block that was really counterproductive. So I'm presenting this on Wednesday, actually, up at the GovProcure conference in Sydney, and I'd expect to see some different results again when I ask this question about access to social media sites from some of the government bodies. which you know, a bit more conservative on that side as well. So that will be interesting. The clear results, however, are that site blocking corporates are now in the minority. But if your organisation does have this blanket ban, it's a good idea to build a business case that focuses on the ways that your online network could benefit the company. So don't put this in your business case, but the other thing to keep in mind is that for individuals, a lack of access to professional social media is also likely to reduce your career advancement opportunities through your external network of peers. So you simply aren't seeing those job opportunities, or you're not getting those references, or you're not top of mind for people who come across those opportunities that your well-connected peers have access to. All right, so I'm just pausing to see if there are any questions. It doesn't look like anything's come through.
I'd like to thank you today, Hugo, and also a big thanks to Ron as well for providing some really great insights and also being very proactive about lifting the supply chain in a complex environment, and also Hugo as well for providing those insights from 500 plus Procurious individuals as well. But I think you've got one more part left.
Yeah, no problem. So I was just going to mention that if you do jump onto the report or download it from the webinar itself, it's absolutely packed with content. So not only contains dozens of insights and charts that I haven't covered today, but there's observations and recommendations. We've got 20 or so key recommendations that link to an article on the Procurious blog that unpacks the issue in more detail. So, for example, this if you're a manager, it's time to shift your thinking is an interview that we did with Tom Derry, who's the CEO of ISM in the United States. We've got some advice on how to find a mentor, how to work best practice collaborative working with remote team members, how to get your online profile up to scratch, best practice crowdsourcing solutions online, and that piece I mentioned about driving change using every tool in the toolkit.
Excellent. Well, I'd also like to say a big thank you for the involvement for each of the FLIP members today, and also for the program across 2017. I hope that over the past year, the FLIP members have been able to connect with their peers within similar roles in other organisations, and we really encourage you to continue to stay in touch with the different networks moving forward. Just a quick update, in 2018 we'll be looking to continue on this FLIP Roundtable program, and what it will involve is a national roundtable meeting right at the beginning of the year. There'll be 2 digital meetings, and the other thing that we wanted to add in to the actual program is 2 tickets to the Big Ideas Summit, which will be in October in Sydney. We launched the Big Ideas Summit event this year in Melbourne only about a month or so ago, and we had over 150 attendees, and we had international speakers. So we really wanted to include that as part of the actual FLIP program, and also as part of professional development for the future leaders as well. So that's just a quick update about what we've got planned for next year. I would also hope that for the 2 new nominees from your organisation, that you would connect with them and potentially even start some form of alumni with the Future Leaders Roundtable program, and to be able to support each other as well. So I want to let you know that we'll also be sending a survey to get your feedback from today and the program. I wish you all the best for the remainder of this year, which is happening very quickly, and Christmas will be here before we know it. And I look forward to working with you in the future. And once again, thank you very much for everyone involved. Thanks a lot. Bye.